day in the life of Jesus. Looking at some things. Yes, sir. No? You mean you want to hear this? Okay. All right, here we go. And so, oh, now we are loud. Okay. So we're going to be in Mark 5. We're going to look at two miracles here today. And like I said yesterday, when you look at these lessons, it's kind of like an onion. You see the obvious lesson, but you go back and, oh, there's another layer I didn't see, and then there's another layer, and it just seems to be endless. And this is one of my favorite sections in the Bible because it's just so rich and so much information here. Two miracles, very powerful, very different. And what Mark does, unlike the other Gospels, he moves quickly. And we're going to kind of look at the bigger picture, then we'll kind of zoom in just a little bit more. The word immediately, we'll see that used often in here. Things happen, and immediately he's healed. Immediately this takes place. And so that's kind of what we're going to look at here. You know, when we take a step back and look at some of these things, it's interesting that one of my favorite things to do is see the Lord's interaction with people. And there are four things that come to the surface, and it's the same thing with us. First of all, every person has a story, as you do. Every person has a past, and there's some things in our past that may not be good, but all of us have a story. And when you're talking to your friends and your family members, and you're trying to get that conversation started about Jesus, that's some of the best ways. Just tell me your story, and because everyone has one. Secondly, every person has a problem. We may not want to admit it, but we all do. And most times it's somehow linked to sin somehow. Number three, every person is valued by Jesus. Every person. If we had weeks to be together and talk about some of these lessons, there would be time when people interrupt Jesus and they would be calling out from the audience to him. And you never find in the Bible Jesus saying, you bother me, or no, not today, or I imagine you talking to me. You never see that. Every person was valued by Jesus. And then the fourth thing is every person needed Jesus. And whether they realize it or not, they did. So let's begin. Let me read the text to you. It's a little bit long. It's going to start in Mark 5:21, and it's going to go to the end of the chapter. And then we're going to go back through and look at the big picture and then the little picture as we do this. And like I said yesterday, this is like a class, so I might ask you things. If you got something, just come on in. Let's just jump in and do this together. So Mark 5, starting with verse 21. And when Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered about him, and he stayed at the seashore. Let me just kind of do a little timeout right there. We're on the Sea of Galilee here. Okay, I got to go there in July and to get to see these things. And it really changed how I see this. You know, our guide said, it's not going to change the Bible, but it's going to put color in that Bible. And one of the things I was amazed is when I thought of the Sea of Galilee, I'm thinking like Lake Michigan, something like that. No, you can see from one side to the other side. And on the north side of the Sea of Galilee, 70% of Jesus' ministry was done right there. And so this is where we're at right here. And verse 22, one of the synagogue officials named Jairus came up and upon seeing him fell at his feet and entreated him earnestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her, and she will get well and live. And he went off with him, and a great multitude was following him and pressing in on him. And a woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and had endured much at the hands of many physicians, had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather grown worse. And hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak. For she thought, if I just touch his garments, I shall get well. And immediately the flow of blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she had been healed of her affliction. And immediately, see those immediatelys? And immediately Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power was proceeding from him, had gone forth, turned around in the crowd, and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the multitude pressing in on you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see the woman who had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. While he's still speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, your little daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher anymore? But Jesus, overhearing this being spoken, said to the synagogue official, do not be afraid any longer, only believe. And he allowed no one to follow with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the synagogue official, and he beheld a commotion, and people loudly weeping and wailing. And entering in, he said to them, why make a commotion and weep? The child has not died, but is asleep. And they were laughing at him. But putting them all out, he took the child's father and mother and his own companions, entered the room where the child was. And taking the child by the hand, he said to her, Talitha, which translated means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began to walk, for she was 12 years old. And immediately they were completely astonished. See the immediatelys again? And he gave her some strict orders that no one should know about this, and he said that something should be given to her to eat. So that's the story. Neat story. I call this little lesson the 911 of the Bible because of just the urgency and the things that take place within this. Now, let's take a step back, because what Mark does, and we miss this by our chapters, because we remember that the chapters and the verses were put in by man, not by God. And we sometimes, read a chapter, we come to a stop sign. Okay, chapter 4 is over. Now read chapter 5, and we kind of that's how we think. And what we miss is just the flow. So from the end of Mark 4 through what we just read, he just shows us the authority of Jesus over all things. So let's go back to the end of chapter 4. End of chapter 4, we have, begin verse 35, the storm. Now, I use a New American Standard, and verse 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41 all start with the word and. Okay, remember our Sunday morning Bible class, repeated words? These are like train cars. This is all connected together. 35 says, and on that day when evening had come, he said to them, let us go over to the other side. Again, the Sea of Galilee. We're on one side, we cross over. And what we're going to see, we cross over this thing 3 or 4 times in just these next few verses. Leaving the multitude, they took along with him as he was in the boat, and other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. Now let's stop and notice verse 37. 3 things about verse 37. You may not know anything about boats. If someone says, what side's the starboard side? You may say, I don't know. I don't know boats, okay? But there's 3 things we know in this verse here. First of all, the phrase, a fierce gale of wind. The Greek word here is the same word we get for a seismograph. It's a word for earthquake, okay? So we're not just talking a little bit of white water here. We're talking about an intense storm, okay? Peter, James, and John lived on that lake, and they had seen this. I can only imagine what Matthew would have been doing. Matthew's the desk guy. He's a white collar. He's the tax collector, and I imagine as soon as the boat went up just a little bit, he was already screaming. So first of all, it says there's a fierce gale of wind. The waves were breaking over the boat. Now, the waves are supposed to be under the boat, not over the boat. You got waves over the boat, you got some problems. And then it says in verse 37, the boat was filling up, okay? Now, the water is supposed to be on the outside, not the inside of the boat. So this is a serious problem here. And it says, verse 38, he was asleep in the stern on the cushion, and they awoke him and said to him, teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Notice this. They did not say, have you ever seen this? They did not say, can you do something about this? Do you not care? That's a heart issue. Don't you care that we're dying? Okay, that's what they said. For verse 39, he, being aroused, rebuked the wind and said to the sea, hush, be still. The wind died down and it became perfectly calm. He said to them, why are you so timid? How is it you have no faith? And they became very much afraid and said to one another, who is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? What Jesus did here is he changes the weather. No person can ever do that. We go to the very next verse, chapter 5, verse 1. They came to the other side of the country of the Gerasenes. And when he came out of the boat, immediately, there's that word again, a man from the tombs, the unclean spirit, met him. And verse 6, seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up, bowed down. Now this man was naked. He had cut himself with stones. He'd been living up in the cemetery, hollering days and nights. I expect about 11, if not 12 of the apostles were getting themselves back in that boat. I mean, we just went through this storm, and we just thought we were going to die. Now we're finally to land, and look at this guy coming running screaming at us. Okay? And Jesus cast the demon out. Put him in the pigs. Pigs went into the sea. 2,000 of them drowned. It shows that Jesus controls demons. Then we get to our story. And there's this woman with this disease. And Jesus cures the disease. And then the chapter ends, and he conquers death. And there's the 4 impossibilities: changing weather, controlling demons, curing disease, conquering death. And with all 4 of them, he did the same thing. He just said the word. He didn't have to call down angels. He didn't throw any pixie dust. He didn't say hocus pocus. He didn't have to pick up stuff. He just say. He had all authority. That's what Mark's trying to say. His word has all authority. And that's what's so powerful about that. Now, let's go to our story, particularly in these 2 miracles. And one of the things I want you to notice as we think about the synagogue official and this woman who has the issue of blood, there's a series of contrasts between these 2 people. And let's just kind of notice some contrasts. Of course, the first obvious contrast, one's a male, one's a female. Okay? In our world today, that doesn't mean much. But in that first century world, that was huge. What's another contrast here? What's the name of the synagogue official? What's the name of the woman? There's a contrast, isn't it? We don't know who she is. Okay? Okay. Who was the synagogue official wanting Jesus to do a miracle for? Someone else. Who did the woman want the miracle be done? On herself. There's a contrast, isn't there? Okay. The synagogue official, we're not told this, but we just know this from culture and study. Synagogue official would be one who's in charge of the synagogue. Synagogues are more like our church services than we'd think the temple would be. Because, in the temple, you had that one room, you only go in there once a year, run by the high priest. Synagogue, you had men and women mixed together. You would have singing. You'd have someone like I read last night from Mark 4. Jesus was in the synagogue. He got up and read scriptures and talked. So synagogue is closest thing to our worship services. A synagogue official would be one who's in charge of that synagogue. So he would pick who's going to speak today. He would pick the order of things and things like that, okay? Most synagogue officials were kind of well-to-do because that was an important job. Financially, how was this woman doing? Well, it does say. What it says is she had gone to many doctors and they had not gotten better, and she had spent all she had. Now, what does that mean? Not only does it mean that she's broke and she's not getting any better, but she can't go to the doctor tomorrow because I'm out of money. There is no insurance back then. And so you pay. And when you're out of money, you're out of hope. You're out of options. And that's something we see. Now, the synagogue official, how does he approach Jesus? It's a contrast here. He comes right to him and he asks, he begs. What does a woman do? She does. And she doesn't ask, does she? And she doesn't, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And she doesn't ask. There's a contrast there. Now, when the synagogue official approaches Jesus, he bows, okay? She just stands up behind him and touches. Now, later on, she's going to bow. But I think that's kind of interesting. Now, one thing they have in common, verse 23 and also verse 28, they both have the faith that Jesus can make a difference. Come, you can heal my daughter. If I only touch him, I will get well. And those are some things we talk about. So let's talk about the synagogue official just a little bit. To start with, what is the difference between a synagogue and a temple? We're just kind of putting them on a piece of paper. A temple is, a synagogue is. What are some differences between a temple and a synagogue?
Synagogue's probably open to the people.
Okay.
More or less than the temple is.
How many temples were there? At a time, only one. Now, if we're doing biblical history, well, there's Solomon's and but there's only one at a time. How many synagogues were there? Not only every city, but it is estimated there were 300 synagogues in Jerusalem. Okay? Now, remember when Jesus in, here comes that ready recollection, okay? I think it's Acts 16. He's with Lydia, and they're down by the river, okay? Why were they not in the synagogue? It took 12 male Jews to establish a synagogue. And so likely in that community where they were, there was no 12 men to make a synagogue. So this is a synagogue official. We're not told which one it is. Now, what's interesting is when you look at verse 21, when Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered about him, and he stayed by the seashore. Now, when the synagogue official comes up to him, how does he do this? And where I'm going with this is, up to this point in Bible, in our Gospels, synagogue officials have not liked Jesus. There was that man who was healed with a withered hand, and that synagogue official just blew a gasket because it was done on the Sabbath in his. You did this in my synagogue, and he was up. So most synagogue officials, in line with the Pharisees, in line with the priests, did not like Jesus. Now, where I'm going with this is when you look at 21 and 22, the synagogue official doesn't say, Jesus, can we go back? I'd like to say something to you in private. He didn't do that. Before this great crowd, he comes and he bows down. And what he's saying is you know what? I don't care what y'all think about me anymore. I don't care what this does to my reputation. I may lose my position as a synagogue official. It's my little girl, and she's dying. And if you've ever been in that position, you just throw out all reason. I don't care. Save my girl, okay? And there was a lot of pressure for him to do that. And I think it's very impressive that he does that. Now, knowing Jesus, he could have healed that girl right then on that spot. Okay, remember the Canaanite or the Syrophoenician woman? She had a daughter who was severely demon-possessed, and Jesus, your daughter as well. He never saw the girl, but he cast out that demon. Right then, right there, Jesus could have said, she lives. But he didn't. He didn't. Let's go to your house. And so they're going to this house. There's a massive crowd, just, everything about them. And then here's this woman, verse 25, who has this hemorrhage for 12 years. Interesting. How old is this little girl who's dying? 12 years old. Isn't that interesting? 12. Now Jesus is about how old here? Roughly. 31 probably. 12 years before that, you see, really before Jesus even started his ministry, this woman has started having this health issue. And she's had it, and it's been getting worse and worse and worse all along. Now, let's talk about her for a moment. Physically, what would she be like? Okay, what else? Anemic. Probably pale, probably tired, probably very tired, okay? Spiritually, where would she be? Worn down. Considered unclean, which meant she was limited to even how she could worship God because she was unclean. She couldn't even go to the court of the women in the temple because she was considered unclean. And you have to wonder, okay, and I know so many people. I mean, even this morning back home, one of our young college girls, she's a engineer intern. She was crossing the street to go into her work, and she got hit by a car. Now, she's going to be okay, but my phone was blowing up this morning about praying, praying for her, hoping all will go well. And you can imagine this woman for 12 years, how many times she's prayed and prayed and prayed. And not only does it seem like her prayers are not answered, she's getting worse. She's getting worse. So spiritually, she might be a little discouraged. But she didn't give up. And that's going to be a key point here in just a minute. Emotionally, how would you describe her?
She's frustrated. She has depended on man to cure her, and the man has been taking her money
Yeah.
with no results.
And of course, we live in an age of what we call modern medicine. And when you study about things way back then, medicine back then, some of the tonics and potions and, the stuff they'd wear around their neck that stunk, sucking ostrich eggs, and I mean, just all kinds of things we look at today thinking, oh, I would never. But that was modern science back then. But it wasn't helping her. It wasn't helping her. And so emotionally, she's running out of hope, okay? And, if you've ever played sports and you give up hope, the game's over. I love the story of the Little League baseball game. A guy was just leaning over the fence. He's just kind of catching up to the game. He said, son, what's the score? And he said, it's 12-0. He said, well, how you doing? Worth of nothing. He said, but we haven't come to bat yet. So there's a little hope there. But see, this woman had no hope. I mean, I'm now out of money. What am I going to do? I've been to all the doctors, and nothing's working. And things aren't getting well. And then financially, she's out of money. How's she going to buy food? How's she going to, if she has a rent, how's she going to provide that? All those things kind of come up behind that. So she has in her mind, if I come up behind Jesus and I touch him, then I'll get well. Now, there's two thoughts I'm going to kind of stretch on that one. First of all, where would she have gotten that idea? If I come up behind him and just touch him, I'm going to get well. I mean, is that something she made up, or was it something about that? Okay, let's go chapter 3 of Mark. Okay, there's two places I want you to look at. Mark 3, and look at verse 10. Mark 3, verse 10. For he had healed many, with the result that all who had those afflictions pressed about him in order to touch him. And then if you jump ahead to chapter 6 of Mark 6:56, Mark 6:56, it says, and whenever he entered villages or cities or countryside, they were laying the sick in the marketplace and entreating him that they might just touch the fringe of his cloak, and as many touched it were being cured. So this wasn't something that she just made up. I mean, this is something that happened. Now, here's the other question, okay, and this is always bothering us, okay? Did she steal a miracle? I mean, most times Jesus is the force of the miracle. He sees a blind man, I'm going to heal you. Here's something, I'm going to do this. But this woman came up behind him and just touched him. So, did she steal a miracle? Okay.
If you take a look at what happened after that, you'll see she did, because Jesus points out to her, and then he also.
I think you're right.
Besides that, she actually owned up to it when he asked who touched her.
Well, and what's also interesting is when you look at let's see, 28. Let's see, no, 20. Let's see, 31. His disciples said to him, "You see the multitude pressing in on him." How many other people bumped Jesus? Maybe here's somebody with a bad leg. But he didn't get a miracle. Here's someone else, maybe he has some other issue, and he bumps Jesus. He didn't get, because what she did was a touch of faith. It wasn't just I bumped Jesus. I touch in faith, and the Lord knew that. And so she did not steal a miracle, as you might kind of get that idea. And so she touches Jesus, 29 and 30. Immediately the flow of blood was dried up. Now, if we were there, what would we witness physically taking place? Color's coming back. Energy's coming back. She's feeling good. Maybe a smile on her face. It actually worked. I thought it would work. It is working. Immediately Jesus, verse 30, perceiving that the power proceeding from him gone forth. It's not like she squeaked it out of him. You know, he intended this to happen, okay? Then he says in verse 30, who touched my garment. Now, he did that for a reason. He's not trying to embarrass this woman, but all the miracles were done before people. That's one of the reasons why when we get to the temptations of Jesus, turn this stone into bread. Why didn't he do it? Because miracles weren't for selfish reasons. Miracles were always to demonstrate the power of God. If only she knew that and only Jesus knew that, and here's this massive crowd, nobody would have known that. So he did this. He turns around and has a conversation with her so that everyone would know what was taking place. And I think that's kind of a valuable aspect of these things. The disciples are amazed. I mean, they said, Jesus, you asked who touched you. And if you've ever been to a concert or a ball game and you're leaving, you're just kind of, everybody's bumping everybody, I mean, why you even ask that? But he realized what happened. Now, when you go over to Luke's account, Luke chapter 8, same story, but Luke's version of this, Luke chapter 8 and verse 47. As Luke tells us, when the woman touched Jesus, the woman saw that she had not escaped notice. She came trembling and fell down before him. That's what the synagogue official did at the beginning, remember? He bowed right before him. Now she's been exposed. Now everybody knows. And she falls before Jesus in reverence, trembling, it says, and fearful. And it says, and declared in the presence of all the people the reason why she had touched him and how she had immediately been healed. Other translations said she told her whole story. Now, we get lost in the big picture of that, okay? Because where's Jesus going? Where's he going? Not just heal the daughter. She's dying. Now, if these two people were brought into the emergency room at the same time, this 12-year-old daughter and this woman with a hemorrhage, who would they take care of first? Yeah, because she's dying. This is 911. That's why I call this the 911 of the Bible. Now here's where, and I'm going to come back to this in some of our application. Here's where Jesus is Jesus, and here's where Roger would have fumbled the ball. Okay? Had it been Roger, I would have said, honey, you had this for 12 years. Hang in there another hour. I'll be right back and take care of you. This is more important. This girl's dying. That's how I would have done it. That's not how Jesus did it. Okay? Because that woman was just as important as that little girl. And so he has this conversation with her. And you can imagine the synagogue official. Come on. We gotta go. Ambulance is running. Let's go. And they're talking, and then we get to verse 35. Okay? Verse 34, let's not forget that. He said to her daughter, okay? She's embarrassed, she's scared, she's fallen down, she's trembling. And very few times does Jesus use that word. But he uses daughter to say, it's okay. It's okay. What you did is right. And don't feel ashamed. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Be healed of your affliction. 35 now. While he was still speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue official saying, your little daughter has died. Now, the Bible doesn't say this, but being a dad, I would have just fallen right down on the floor right then. It's too late. It's too late. You spent all this time talking to this woman, and it really didn't matter. And now she's dead. Now, read the end of verse 35. Why trouble the teacher anymore? Why did they say that?
I figured it was too late.
They feel like even Jesus can't do anything now. While there's alive, Jesus can heal. While there's hope, Jesus can do that. But once she died, even Jesus can't do anything. And we'll come back and talk about that in just a minute. So then, Jesus tells the Father, don't be afraid any longer, only believe. He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, that little inner circle. There's great lessons in there. What they saw, they were there at the Transfiguration. They got to see Jesus pray in the garden and things such as that. And they came to the house of the synagogue official, and behold, a commotion and people loudly weeping and wailing. One of the things in the first century world, and it would be a job I would not want, but people got paid to be professional mourners. And there's been a death. I mean, these are small villages. Little girl died. So here comes the people with the drums and the flutes and people just bawling and bawling, making a big commotion. And Jesus gets them out of there. Now, he says the child has not died but is asleep. And for those of us that know that Bible, that's a phrase that's used multiple times. It's only used of the righteous. Our friend Lazarus, John 11, is asleep. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about those who are asleep. 1 Thessalonians 4, those who are asleep. Talks about the death of the righteous, okay? Now, when a person's asleep, you're unaware of what's going on all around you, but you're still alive, okay? Dead physically, but still alive. Now, 40 is interesting. Laughing at Jesus. That's just interesting, isn't it? I mean, we got faith after faith after faith in here, and here's people laughing at Jesus. It just makes you wonder. So then he gets everybody out of the house, but the mother, father, Peter, James, and John, and he says to her, Talitha cum. Why does it say that? Which translated means, little girl, I say to you, arise. What Mark does is he's quoting Jesus. This is what Jesus actually said. It's Aramaic. Mark is writing to Greek Christians. Greek Christians don't know what that word means, as you and I. If that word was in there without the translation, we won't know what that means. So he's telling us this is what Jesus said, this is what it means. And he does that to give us, the understanding. Mark does that several times in his gospel. You'll see a word, then a translation. Here's the Aramaic. This is what Jesus said, but here is what it means. And he says to her, little girl, I say to you, arise. Verse 42, immediately the girl got up. Now, we mentioned this earlier, but this shows you the authority of Jesus. You and I can stand at the grave of our parents and we can say, Mom, Dad, this is what's been going on, yada, 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 but they can't hear us. They can't hear. The dead hear Jesus. Just as the woman, just as the demon, just as the storm, Jesus could talk to that dead little girl, and she's in the other world now. Her spirit's gone. That's what the Bible says. Remember, when we die, our bodies go to the grave, and our spirits go to God or go to Hades. She heard him there, and immediately she obeyed him. Okay? Now, that's the story. I've got some applications we're going to put into some of this in just a minute, but what a neat story, isn't it? Isn't it just a neat story? And it's just layered with all kinds of wonderful applications. What are some of your thoughts or your questions or some things you see that I missed? It's just great stuff. Yes, sir.
Well, if you take a look at the people that Christ resurrected, there's a pattern to that, and it shows his power. And as you talked about, sometimes he touched the person, sometimes he just said, be healed. Sometimes the person was already dead, and he came back and healed him. And then with Lazarus, the time frame is important.
It is.
Okay?
It is.
With Lazarus been dead for 4 days or so. So that just shows Christ. There's no limit.
There's no limit. There's no limit. And
And he can be
It doesn't matter. Sometimes when he did a miracle from afar, I mean, our world today, the doctor would have to make an assessment. Let me run a few tests. Let me kind of figure out where you are, and then I decide what you need. Not Jesus. I don't even have to see you. Yeah, you're healed. And that just shows you his power. Anything else? Anybody sees?
He told the crowd not to go tell anyone. Now, how could they keep from that?
Yeah. You know what's interesting? In Mark 5, let me just show you this. It is really interesting. When we go back to that demon-possessed man, look at verse 18, verse 19 of Mark 5. This is the man who it says his name was Legion. It says, as he got in the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed was entreating him that he might accompany him, and he did not let him. But he said, go home to your people, report to them what great things the Lord has done for you. Before this, and multiple times after this, at the end here in chapter 5 and chapter 8, multiple times Jesus will do a miracle and say, don't tell anybody. You know they did. You know they did. But the reason, I think, for that is things are snowballing. And Jesus is on a mission here. He's on a timetable. And he definitely has to get his disciples at a place where they can be developed. You look like in Luke chapter 12, verse 1, it said that there are so many thousands of people in the crowd, they were stepping on each other. So the word was getting out. But what's interesting to me in Mark 5, the very first person he tells, you can go tell, is this guy who was naked, screaming at night, cutting himself. And what's also interesting about that man, and this is just interesting, it says, go tell your people. You have your people, I have my people. My people aren't your people aren't my people, but we all have our people, don't we? And we can tell our people. Now, what's also interesting about this is Jesus did not say, now, we're going to have 13-week Bible class about evangelism. No, he didn't have that. He didn't say, now, be sure you get some tracts with you. He had no tracts to take with him. All he could say is, this is what Jesus did to me. And that's something every one of us ought to be able to say, I was in high school, I was in college, I was this way, I was this way, but this is what Jesus did for me. He changed my life. Okay, other thoughts?
Getting back to his power, the lady that had the bleeding didn't actually touch him. She just touched his garment.
Right, which I think, I'm glad you said that because I forgot about that, which I think is important to see that he wanted her to know that it was Jesus, not magical clothes that made you well. He, at the end of the day, he takes off those clothes and puts on his jammies. Well, if I could just go over there and touch, no, it wasn't the clothes that made her well. It was the Lord. And I think that's another reason for turning around, let's have this conversation. And Jesus knew her faith. Your faith has made me well. It made you well. Okay, other thoughts? Okay, some applications. Number 1, the importance of everyone. Okay? You and I, as I just said, we would take care of this dying girl first, but that's not the order of things, okay? And as we looked at that contrast, in that first century world, males were above females. In that first century world, a synagogue official would be more important than this broke woman. That's how that culture would have looked at that. But in the eyes of Jesus, I'm making you equal. She's just as important. Now, with that, I can sometimes think that I need Jesus more than you need Jesus. My needs are more important than your needs. I need Jesus first. You can wait in line. But that's not what happened here, okay? And I think that's just how things shake down here and how the order was done. I think it's just a remarkable lesson about that. And to see that. Now, keep your hand here, and let's go over to the book of Galatians. And again, just notice this contrast. Passage we've read multiple times, Galatians chapter 3. And in verse 28, Galatians 3:28, we see these different social classes, we may say, in the first century church. Galatians 3:28, there's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither slave nor free man, neither male nor female. You're all one in Christ Jesus. A Greek would be the same thing as a Gentile. And the stories abound about how Jews felt about a Gentile. If a Jewish man came upon a cart that turned over and a man and his dog were trapped, you save the dog first because that's a Gentile. That's how they viewed things. Now, what we're not told is the logistics of how they worshiped, okay? But imagine borrowing how we worship pre-COVID, because COVID changed everything. We're passing the emblems, doing the Lord's Supper. Now, we don't know how they did that. But imagine a master handing the Lord's Supper to his slave, knowing that as soon as services are over, we're going to go home and he's going to feed me first. But I'm serving him. Or here is a Jewish man, and he's serving the Lord's Supper to a Gentile. Or here's a man serving it to a woman. Now, today that doesn't mean anything to us, but in that culture, it did. And so what we see here in Mark 5 is not only do we see her need was just as important as your need, here's an unnamed woman, and here's a well-known synagogue official, and Jesus is saying she is just as important as you. And I think that's significant, okay? Second lesson, touch of faith. How many times Jesus touched? How many times? Touched the eyes of the blind. He touched, remember that woman was going out to the cemetery. Her son was there. Jesus stopped. He touched the coffin and said to the young man, arise. Look in Revelation 1. I mean, even late in the New Testaments, we find an example of Jesus. Remember in Revelation 1 when John is seeing this great vision of Jesus and all this image of who Jesus is. And it says in verse 17 of Revelation 1, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as a dead man, and he laid his right hand upon me. See that? One of the things that we have learned through COVID is that you can watch live stream, you can get all the information, you can Lord's Supper at home, you can do all that stuff, but what's missing is the fellowship, is the smiles, the handshakes, the hug. That's valuable. That's very valuable. And what's interesting is teenage anxiety and teenage suicide has skyrocketed during COVID. And what they're thinking is there's just been so much isolation, so much paranoia in the world that people are just missing people. And our culture today has got so much on Facebook that what we sometimes miss is that face-to-face interaction. We can say things on Facebook, we can put things out on Twitter, we can text. I do all those things all day long, but nothing beats seeing you. I think there's a lesson there, okay? Now, third lesson from verse 35. We can put a ceiling on Jesus. The servants said, why bother him anymore? They felt like Jesus couldn't do that. We can do the same thing. We can say, Jesus can't fix my marriage. Jesus can't fix my addiction. Jesus can't help me at all. I love what, there's a obscure translation written by a guy named Goodspeed. And in verse 35, Jesus said, Goodspeed says, Jesus paid no attention to what they said. I like that. Y'all talking nonsense, You wait and see what I can do. And it may be, and I kind of think this is the way it is, I think Jesus did this on purpose. I think he intended for that girl to die, knowing that I'm going to bring her back. I mean, for us, man, nothing could be worse than dying. For Jesus, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. I'm going to just bring her right back. Everything's going to be fine. Whatever she died from, it's going to be gone. 12-year-old girls are supposed to be outside playing and running and giggling and having all kinds of fun. And we don't know why she died. Was she injured? Did she have some disease? But she got up immediately, and she was well. And then the last thing, you go back over here to verse 42, okay? So Jesus goes in his house. 41, he takes the dead girl's in his hand. He's speaking to her. Okay? Little girl, I say to you, arise. Her eyes open. I think the first person she sees is Jesus. Now, I can't say this for sure, but I sure like to think that when I close my eyes here for the last time and I open my eyes on the other side, I see Jesus. Isn't that something? I just like that idea. Just love that idea. That he held her hand and she got well. Okay, any other thoughts, comments? Neat story, isn't it? Flows fast and lots of stuff in there. And that's why I love Mark, because it just is rapid. And what you see, okay, what you see is kind of how I write my jump stars. There's just layers. You go back over this next week, you'll find some things we didn't talk about. There's just layers and layers and layers of wonderful lessons here. And you get that as you see how Jesus is. So tomorrow we're going to do one other miracle. I'm not going to tell you which one it is because I got a little quiz I'm going to do with you at first. But it'll also show you the power of Jesus and some of the things we're doing. Okay? Any final thoughts? All right, let's end with a prayer. We're thankful, Father, for your word. We're thankful for the faith that we need to have as well, Father. We pray that if we were there, we too would have gone to you. We would have reached out and touched you, Father. We're thankful for how you heal us. We're thankful for your love upon us, Father. We look forward to spending forever with you, Father. Thank you so much for this day. May we be safe as we travel. Bless each of us. In Jesus' name, amen.